photos of Annie, and the background is almost always a Spartan Springs cabin. But back to Michael and Betsy, specifically Betsy. In 1889, now 1 year after Sparkling Springs, the Weavers' congregation, I still have cabin on my mind, the Weavers' congregation in Harrisonburg needed women leaders to assist with ministry tasks pertaining to the women of the congregation. The congregation had been ordaining deaconesses for several years now. These women were not necessarily ministers' wives or deacons' wives. They were called in their own right, deaconess. Though she was relatively new to the congregation, Betsy Showalter was selected by majority vote of the Weavers' congregation and ordained. This was reported in her obituary and also in Harry Brunt's book, History of Mennonites in Virginia. Her responsibilities would have included caring for the women of the congregation, counseling women, greeting women who were just baptized, leading the women in foot washing, and providing bread and grape juice for communion, and in general assisting the ministers. My father apparently never knew that his great-grandma was a deaconess, or that her nickname was Betsy. Here is another story about Betsy that Daddy loved to tell, and I will tell this in his own words. He only knew her name to be Elizabeth, so that's what I'll use in this story. So I quote my father's words of great-grandmother Betsy. Elizabeth used to hang her shawl and bonnet on a wooden peg in the wall at the old Weavers Mennonite church. Someone thought this shawl and bonnet hanging on the wall didn't look very respectable, so they removed the peg. The next Sunday, when Elizabeth attempted to hang her wraps on the peg, it was gone, so she had to sit down without hanging anything there. But the next Sunday, she came prepared. She marched up to where the peg had been, reached in her dress pocket and pulled out a peg, placed the peg in the hole in the wall, placed her shawl and bonnet on the peg, then her task being completed, she turned around, faced the audience, and bowed to them. End of quote. I think she was a character. Daddy liked to tell Elizabeth stories. And so Michael and Elizabeth attended Weavers Mennonite Church in their later years, and Betsy served the congregation as deaconess. Michael and Betsy are buried in the cemetery at Weavers Mennonite Church. My little grandson Andre is buried in the same cemetery. Generation 6, Moab and Anna, or Anna. Moab was 24 when he married 17-year-old Annie Smith. Here is their story. Moab and a friend decided it was time to find a wife, and Virginia did not offer them the picking choice they were looking for. So, they traveled first to Lancaster County, where Moab's friend found a girlfriend, but Moab did not. Coming back from Lancaster County through the Cumberland Valley, they got caught in a blizzard. Somehow, they ended up on the Tobias Shank farm at Cheese Hollow near Smithsburg, Maryland. Moab noticed daughter Annie and decided she was the right one for him. The feeling must have been mutual because sometime later, they were married. So Annie Shank of Smithsburg, Maryland, and she was not related to her mother-in-law, Betsy, who was from the Virginia Shanks. Since Moab was the oldest of Michael and Betsy's children, he and his new bride, Annie, took over the farming at the Showalter homestead west of Broadway. Michael and Betsy moved to another farm at that time. By 1888, having been married and farming for 9 years, Michael and Annie were possibly restless. I suspect Annie was homesick for her family back in Maryland. And Virginia still had not shaken off all of the vestiges from the Civil War. On top of this, farming wasn't quite as great in Rockingham County as what, comparing notes, it might have been in Washington County, Maryland. Then this. Moab and Annie suspected that their hired man was stealing from their eggs. Now, I know that some of you were told chickens, but I'm from the Alpha line of the family, and we say it was eggs, but we can debate that detail later if you need to. Like I said, they suspected that their hired man was stealing eggs, and they confronted him. He denied it, and he threatened to sue them for defamation of character. They didn't want to face a lawsuit, and that was the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back. Overnight, they decided to move to Maryland. They packed up, they left the 100-year-old Showalter homestead behind for relatives to sell. They settled near Annie's Shank relatives near Smithsburg, Maryland. And that's where Moab built his first house, the smallest of houses he would build, at the crossroads of Row Road and the Leitersburg-Smithsburg Road. The children enrolled in nearby Shank School. An old photo of the school shows the children who attended there. We have, of the Showalter children, Amanda's the oldest, my grandfather Alva, and we have little brother Amos. Other children would have been too young to attend school, or perhaps weren't born yet. Here's a close-up of the three of them. In the school picture, the other children were most likely cousins of theirs. They had Shank cousins and Martin cousins. Now, on a side note, I also have this old picture of what's called the California School near Greencastle. And I am told that my grandma, Katie Shank, is in the back row right there. And I wonder if anybody has seen this photo before and knows if Katie's younger sister, Rhoda, is in the picture. I think she has to be. Does anybody know if Rhoda is in this picture? If you're not sure, we can talk about that later. I'm hoping maybe to find that out soon. Moab and Annie lived at Smithsburg for just 2 years. Then they bought land near Reed and built this house with the barn behind it. There they lived for 19 years, then moved to near Morgansville and built the house on the Martin Showalter farm. Here is the lane. That is all that remains of it. And I wonder if even that lane remains anymore. And this view from Google, from above, shows the buildings before any of them were torn down.
The lane is still there.
The lane is there, okay, all right. So it looks maybe about like that photo. Here's zoomed in, and this might be the last picture of the Martin Showalter farm before the buildings were removed. The last house Moab built for himself was on the corner of Pennsylvania Avenue and Showalter Road, where he and Annie retired. He built other homes, including this one on Showalter Road. I knew this as Laban's farm or home. At this location on Showalter Road, where the entrance to the airport is today, that was where Alva's farm stood. And he built this house for his Shank relatives in Reed, who then sold it to Moab's son Alva, and my father was born here. In my growing up years, Lee and Mary Lois Martin lived in this house. Moab never accepted automobiles or photography. Until a year ago, I believed that there were no photographs of Moab, until Ronnie told me otherwise. He identified the man sitting on the plow as Moab, the man driving the tractor as Martin. If anybody else has a photograph of Moab, it's rare, and I would love to get a scanned copy of it. Moab put pressure on his children to not own automobiles, but they eventually did. He was so set against automobiles, he moved his church membership from Rice to the Old Order, the Horse and Buggy Mennonites of Dayton, Virginia. The story is told of his son Martin offering him a ride to Virginia in his truck. Moab refused to ride in the cab. Instead, he did agree to ride in the bed of the truck from Hagerstown to Harrisonburg. I'm thinking must have been quite a spectacle at the time. He never moved back to Virginia, even though his church membership had gone back to Virginia. Nevertheless, he was buried at Rife's Mennonite Church. But that brings up another story. He had requested that his casket be carried in a horse-drawn hearse. The only problem was that by the time he died, there wasn't a horse-drawn hearse in Hagerstown to be had. So out of respect, they agreed that the automotive hearse would be driven at the speed of a horse. And thus, Moab was laid to rest in the cemetery at Rice.
There's a little more to that story.
Okay?
He asked the undertaker at Newcastle to keep a horse-drawn hearse. But when he died, the hearse was not fit to be used.
Okay. So one was kept, but it was not fit. Okay, there's some extra. Moab and Annie's children are on this picture. I have it identified downstairs as well, so I'll not go into it. And not interested too much in talking about the next generation, except that I can't talk about Moab without my mind going to this picture. Moab had 6 grandsons whose middle name was named after him. Here is a picture of 5 of them. Missing is Raymond Eby, who had died in 1932. But there was an earlier picture of the 6. Now the man in the back row on the left is standing in for Raymond. And I was told somebody had taken Raymond's picture and photoshopped it into this picture before photoshopping was a thing. So the picture of the Moabs. From time to time I'm asked by some of my relatives, are we related to this Showalter or that Showalter? And so for the remainder I'm going to talk about a few Showalters. And the answer is always yes. But it might not be we can explain where or how. But for these, I will be able to explain where or how. 3 years ago, I explored the question, are we related to Buck? Meaning Buck Showalter, manager of the Baltimore Orioles baseball team. And I explained how Buck is my 6th cousin once removed. I won't go into all that this year. But 1 week after our meeting, Cousin Buck, as I call him now, since I've proved the connection, was named 2014 American League Manager of the Year. I had actually sent Buck an invitation to our history meeting 3 years ago. He didn't make it, but he did send me a nice letter on official Baltimore Orioles stationery expressing his regrets. He hoped there was a nice Showalter turnout. And if you were here, you know, and there was. Next we go to, oh, there's the letter. Next we go to Mary Emma Showalter. Mary Emma was born in 1913 in Broadway, Virginia, to HDH and Flora Grove Showalter. Now, when you hear of any Showalter coming out of Broadway, Virginia, it's not a question of whether we're related, it's only a question of how closely are we related. Mary Emma was the 2nd cousin of Amanda, Alva, Amos, etc. Mary Emma graduated from James Madison University. She received a master's degree in home economics from the University of Tennessee, a doctorate in home economics education at Pennsylvania State University. She spent 4 years with Mennonite Central Committee before beginning her teaching career. She founded the home economics department at Eastern Mennonite University, where she taught. From 1946 to 1972, Mary Emma was an innovator and a trailblazer for women. Though there are dozens, perhaps hundreds, today, Mennonite and Amish cookbooks, in 1947 there were none. Mary Emma observed that a cookbook of favorite recipes of Mennonite families had never been published. She partnered with a group called Mennonite Community Association, centered in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania, but not affiliated with Mennonite Publishing House, as you will soon see. Some of your mothers and grandmothers probably saw this appeal in November 1947. Do you have a recipe to share? And it follows an invitation to send in recipes. They came in by the thousands, and Mary Emma went into high gear. By April 1950, 2.5 years after the appeal for recipes, the magazine Mennonite Community printed this notice, announcing the Mennonite Community Cookbook. On June 5th of this year, the Mennonite Community Association will release the Mennonite Community Cookbook. Mary Emma Showalter, head of the Home Economics Department of Eastern Mennonite College, is the author. The price of the books was $3.50, or for another 50 cents, you could get it with the finger indexes, $4. The full-page article went on to explain that the publisher would be John C. Winston Company of Philadelphia, and not the more obvious choice of Mennonite Publishing House, in order, they said, to give the book a wider circulation. But the story behind the scenes is that maybe the Mennonite Publishing House was telling Mary Emma that the cookbook just wasn't spiritual enough for them to publish, and all of this probably reflected their